I again welcome you all in this session of Basic Mechanical Engineering. We have already discussed the working of four-stroke petrol and diesel engines. In this lecture, we will discuss the working of a two-stroke engine. If a two-stroke engine is defined, then it can be defined like in a two-stroke engine, the working cycle is completed. The working cycle is completed into two strokes of the piston, and one revolution of the crankshaft. The working cycle is completed in two strokes of the piston and one revolution of the crankshaft. What is the meaning of working cycle? We have already learned the working cycle is the combination of suction, compression, expansion and exhaust strokes. So in a two-stroke engine, there are two strokes of the piston and one revolution of the crankshaft. How it is achieved? The suction and compression are carried out into a single stroke simultaneously, while expansion and exhaust are carried out into another stroke simultaneously. Again, I am repeating, the suction stroke and compression stroke are carried out in a single stroke of the piston, and the expansion and exhaust strokes are carried out into another single stroke of the piston. Therefore, the engine is known as two-stroke engine. Observe the to explain the concept of the two-stroke engine. I am taking example of a two-stroke petrol engine. Already we know that in a petrol engine, the suction of charge takes place inside the engine cylinder. First of all, a mixture of air and fuel is prepared by the carburetor, and the same is supplied into the engine cylinder. I am again repeating, in a petrol engine, a mixture of air and fuel is prepared by the carburetor. The same is supplied into the engine cylinder. Now let's observe the functioning or working of a two-stroke petrol engine. In a two-stroke engine, the suction and compression take place simultaneously into a single stroke of the piston. To observe the functioning, let's take care of this diagram. Let's understand this diagram or visualize this diagram very carefully. This is the engine cylinder. Whole body engine cylinder. This is the piston, connecting rod, crank. This is the crankshaft. This is the crankcase. This is known as crankcase. Observe here, this is the crankcase. Now, the two-stroke engine consists of ports. In four-stroke engine, we have valves, inlet valve and exhaust valve. But in two-stroke engine, we have inlet port, transfer port and exhaust port. This is the basic difference between a two-stroke and four-stroke engine. The two-stroke engine consists of inlet port for suction of the charge, exhaust port for removal of the product of the combustion, and there is another port, transfer port. Now let us understand the mechanism or the functioning of two-stroke engine. The first stroke of the piston, in which the suction and compression are carried out. During this stroke, the piston moves from BDC to TDC. Now let us assume that there is already some charge over there inside the engine cylinder. Let us assume from where the charge came. You need not to worry about that. Let us assume that already there was some charge. The piston was at BDC. Already some charge was there inside the engine cylinder. Charge means the mixture of air and fuel. Already some charge is there inside the engine cylinder. The piston is at BDC. The piston moves from BDC to TDC. During this stroke of the piston, during this upward motion of the piston, the charge inside the engine cylinder is compressed. Observe over here. Piston is moving upward. The charge which is already present inside the engine cylinder is compressed during this upward motion of the piston. At the same time, the pressure inside the crankcase is reduced or falls below the atmospheric pressure. Because the piston is moving upward, therefore a partial vacuum is created behind the piston. Due to this, the suction of the charge takes place inside the crankcase. Through this inlet port. Again, I am repeating, the piston is moving from BDC to TDC. The charge which is already present inside the engine cylinder is compressed. At the same time, the pressure inside the crankcase falls below the atmospheric pressure. This causes the suction of the charge inside the crankcase. That is how the suction and compression has been accomplished into a single stroke of the piston. The piston is moving upward, the charge is getting compressed. At the same time, the suction of the charge takes place behind the piston inside the crankcase. This completes the one stroke of the piston, and into this one stroke of the piston, when the piston is moving from BDC to TDC, we have compressed the charge. At the same time, the suction of the charge has also taken place. Okay, I think it is very much clear to you. The theory has been written. Now, observe the next stroke of the piston. Observe the next stroke of the piston. There is now the stroke second. Into the stroke second, the expansion and exhaust are carried out simultaneously. In second stroke of the piston, the expansion and exhaust are carried out simultaneously. How they are carried out, let's understand. Now, the piston, when the piston reaches the TDC, just before reaching the TDC, the charge is ignited by means of a spark plug. During the upward movement of the piston, when the charge was getting compressed, just before the piston reaches the TDC, the charge was ignited by means of a spark plug. Since we all know that the petrol engine is fitted with a spark plug, so charge is ignited by means of a spark plug. During this ignition process, the combustion of the fuel takes place. As a result of that, very large amount of heat is liberated, which is associated with very high pressure and temperature, and the thrust is exerted on the piston. The piston moves from TDC to BDC. When the piston moves from TDC to BDC, the piston uncovers the transfer port. Observe over here, the piston is moving from TDC to BDC. When the piston moves from TDC to BDC, it uncovers the transfer port. The transfer port is uncovered. As a result of that, the charge from crankcase moves through this transfer port into the engine cylinder. At the same time, the piston has been designed such a way that it deflects the fresh charge upward. And at the same time, the exhaust port is also uncovered. The product of the combustion leaves through this exhaust port. Let me again repeat. When the piston reaches when the piston is about to reach that top dead center, the charge is ignited by means of a spark plug. As a result of that, a thrust is exerted on the piston. The piston moves from TDC to BDC. When the piston moves downward, both exhaust port and transfer port are uncovered by the piston. As a result of that, the charge from crankcase enters into the engine cylinder through this transfer port. The fresh charge from the crankcase enters into the engine cylinder through this transfer port, and through the exhaust port, the product of the combustion leaves the engine cylinder. So during downward movement of the piston, two strokes are completed. One is the expansion stroke and another one is the exhaust stroke. The product of combustion is also leaving the engine cylinder. I think it is clear to you. Thank you.